corporate Democrats are preparing for the midterm elections. Yes, some of them are focusing on beating back Republican challengers, but corporate Democrats like Hakeem Jeffries are more focused on raising money to beat challengers, progressive challengers to corporate Democrat incumbents. So this is a story published in the Washington Post. I'm going to read you a few excerpts from it, where they write that Jeffries has formed a new fundraising effort, Team Blue PAC, with Problem Solvers Caucus co-chair Josh Gottheimer and new Democrat coalition co-chair Terry A. Sewell. The group will focus on protecting incumbent members of Congress in safe, this is key, in safe Democratic seats that are not a focus of the House Democratic Campaign Committee. So these are areas that are they're very blue. You don't have to worry about a Republican coming in and taking that seat. But what corporate Democrats want to do is prevent a growing progressive caucus. And when I say progressive caucus, I'm not talking about the current giant progressive caucus, which consists of all sorts of people who aren't actually progressives. They want to prevent individuals who are like members of the squad, like Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez or Ilhan Omar or Rashida Tlaib, Jamal Bowman, you get the picture. So Team Blue has indicated that it will defend at least two incumbents, Representative Danny Davis from Illinois and Representative Carolyn Maloney from New York, two liberals who face fresh challenges from young women of color backed by the Justice Democrats. Now, both of the incumbents do take corporate PAC money, they take large dollar donations, and of course, part of being a Justice Democrat is that you reject that legalized bribery. And so Keena Collins is challenging Davis in Illinois' 7th congressional district, and here's what she has to say about it. Quote, "I think it is completely backward, and I think it's hypocritical of Representative Jeffries and quite frankly, Representative Davis, who have both challenged incumbents before. He bullied Cori Bush and he bullied Morgan Harper, who ran in Ohio, and now he's trying to bully me and Ronna." And so Jeffries, by the way, started his political career in New York by challenging an incumbent Democrat in the state assembly. Just something you should know about. Now, who's Ronna? Well, she's the individual who is challenging Maloney. Ronna Abdelhamid, a Google employee who also works as a women's empowerment and self-defense activist, has been endorsed by the Justice Democrats to challenge Maloney. Abdelhamid's campaign announced on Monday that it raised $411,265 in the second quarter, which is more than Maloney has raised in the first 3 months of the year. And so this is a pretty aggressive effort. Jeffries claims that this PAC that's meant to protect these corporate Democrats has already raised $1.4 million. And it is concerning when you want to pursue this inside-outside strategy, right? Ensure that we elect real progressives into Congress who have priorities like Medicare for All and the Green New Deal, and then apply pressure from the outside, which, by the way, our wonderful members have done in the form of forcing a Senate floor vote on a $15 an hour minimum wage. And we thank our members for that. If you want to be part of efforts like that, you can join and become a member by clicking that join button if you're watching on YouTube or going to tyt.com/join. But Cenk, I know you have a lot to say about this story, so take it away.
So there's two different parts of this story. One is what these corporate Democrats are doing, and two is how the Washington Post covered it. And I'm particularly enraged about the Washington Post coverage. I'm going to get to that in 1 second. First, about the people who are doing this. Now, remember, the news peg in this story is that Hakeem Jeffries and Josh Gottheimer, who's one of the most pro-corporate Democrats in the country, takes tons of money from payday lenders, makes sure that he passes bills to help them, etc. He's part of the so-called Problem Solvers Caucus. I believe the ExxonMobil lobbyists pointed out how they use that particular caucus to kill any legislation that might hurt oil companies. And the Democratic Coalition co-chair Terry A. Sewell, that these folks are getting together to form Team Blue PAC, a PAC whose whole point is to attack progressives, to raise money and I've asked the Washington Post if they're going to do follow-ups, and then Dave Weigel has said that publicly that they will do a follow-up to see where they raise that money from. I'll guarantee you right now, it's going to be corporations, lobbyists, independent expenditures, etc. So the point of this story is these folks are getting together to attack progressives. Does the Washington Post frame it that way? Not at all, okay? But one last quote before I get to them. Gottheimer, but it's part of how they covered it. They quote Gottheimer as saying, if you're spending all of your resources and time fighting with each other instead of fighting the other team, that is a huge distraction. Now remember, this is a story about how he is forming a pack to fight other Democrats. Now, did the Washington Post point that out? No, they just ran his quote uncritically. Oh, here's this beloved Gottheimer trying to do unity by gathering up millions of dollars to attack fellow Democrats. And you can see how those far left people are the ones who are at fault, and Gottheimer is the victim. It's a preposterous quote. You have to at the very least, point out that does seem a bit hypocritical here as we're telling you a story about how he's doing a pact to attack other Democrats. Okay, now let's get to the heart of the Washington Post problem. First of all, the headline. Democratic tensions surface as House incumbents plan defense against far left primary challengers. What the hell kind of headline is that? Who are you to determine who's far left? You can call them progressives, that's what they are. They're the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. You could call them left wing, but far left? Far left says these people are illegitimate and you should never vote for them.
Exactly.
Far left implies that they are radicals and they're not credible. And you think the Washington Post doesn't know that? Of course they know that. The whole point of that headline is to smear progressives and to say, now remember everybody, Hakeem Jeffries and these beloved corporate Democrats are the victims and they're the good guys and the others are far left. Now they're going to pound that home throughout here. They explain, by the way, this is a hilarious part of the story. Hakeem Jeffries has accused the original squad, as well as the Just Democrats, of being white interlopers. There isn't a single white person in the original squad. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, Ayanna Pressley, they're all people of color. Cori Bush, Jamal Bowman, people of color. Yep. White interlopers? No, Hakeem Jeffries is a clown. And by the way, another thing that the article does is it assumes that Hakeem Jeffries is one of the legitimate contenders to become next Speaker of the House. Now, he might be a contender, and that's fair to cover it in the context of others, but no, this makes it seem like he is legitimate and credible. He's a good Democrat who's gonna be the next Speaker. And the poor guy's just starting up a corporate PAC to make sure he attacks other Democrats.
What can you do?
How outrageous is the far left? But it gets worse and worse. The Washington Post kind of editorializes in the middle of the story about how the Democrats have to, quote, avoid the fate of Republicans who repeatedly found themselves too divided along ideological lines to pass legislation when they had the majority. Now, they don't say that in the context of the PAC that started to attack fellow Democrats. They say it in the context of, can you believe that Justice Democrats are doing primaries of other Democrats? Almost all of these Democrats got into office by challenging another Democrat in a primary, right? But now that they're the incumbents, the Washington Post is on their side because they have to serve the powerful. They've made a joke and a mockery of journalism in this country. And then they get into fawning praise of Hakeem Jeffries. They say, this is hilarious. He has cast himself as a leader who can bridge the Democratic donor community and the party's activist base. But wait a minute, he can frame himself that way, but then you should point out the absurdity of that. The activist base despises Hakeem Jeffries.
Activist in what way? In what way is Hakeem Jeffries an activist? I've seen him be an activist and advocate for himself. I mean, he's been eyeing a leadership position. He's been eyeing he's fourth in line for House Speaker, according to how they pay their dues or whatever they do for House Speakership.
How much money they raise.
How much money they're, like that's, how is he an activist? He's not an activist for the people, that's the point. He's an activist for himself and his corporate buddies in Congress, that's it.
Anna, it's about to get way worse and hilarious. So since he has absolutely no support among the activist base, in fact, part of the point of this article is he's attacking the activist base.
Yes.
He's starting a pact to attack the activist base. But the Washington Post says he bridges a divide. By napalming the bridge, is that how he builds it? So what is their evidence for him bridging the divide? They say at the end of Trump impeachment case where he was one of the Democrats who were putting on the case, he ended with a Notorious B.I.G. quote.
Ooh.
Oh, I didn't know he was that
so
activist.
Edgy.
And
so edgy. What did he say, Jay?
He said, if you don't know, now you know. Oh my God, he's so
activist.
Well,
Whoa.
thank you, Washington Post, for
telling.
Oh my God.
B.I.G. Wow, edgy.
Yeah,
edgy.
well, look, Washington Post, I stand corrected. I didn't know he was that connected to the activist space. Okay, I mean, it's a joke. And how do they end the story? Of course, with a quote from Third Way, which they never clarify, is a corporate think tank meant to keep the Democratic Party under the thumb of corporations. Look, even if you don't want to frame it that way, everyone knows the entire point of Third Way is that they get corporate money and they try to do corporate influence of the Democratic Party. If you don't know that and you work at the Washington Post, you should retire immediately, right? But the editor gives them the last line without clarifying any of that. And they say, Matt Bennett, co-founder of Third Way. And they called it a moderate Democratic think tank. So progressives are far left, which, by the way, if you look at the policy positions, we stand for the Democratic Party, according to the polling, on almost every issue. There's a couple of outliers you can find on social issues, but on every economic issue, on most social issues. But we're the far left, even though we stand for about 2/3 to sometimes 80% of the Democratic Party, let alone the country, right? But the corporate guys are the moderates. They're so reasonable. So what did the reasonable people say? They say, with Trumpian insurrectionists so close to power and our democracy hanging in the balance, it's absolutely vital that the far left not weaken our at-risk incumbents in swing districts with divisive primaries. This is not in swing districts.
It's not in swing districts.
So the Washington Post lets Matt Bennett lie to their readers on purpose, and then he answers this. When the Tea Party attacked vulnerable Republicans, it cost them dearly. So that's the editor at the Washington Post saying, now remember, if you're ever thinking about supporting a progressive, never do that. They're far left radicals that are hurting the Democratic Party. Why don't you just go work for them already, okay? This isn't journalism, this is propaganda.
It is
absolute trash.
It absolutely is propaganda. You know, it's funny because you had mentioned it to me in a comment off air. You made your case, you're absolutely right. And that final example of the Third Way quote to wrap up the article is just, it's wrong. I mean, you're allowing someone who clearly has a conflict of interest here and a giant bias to close out the article with a lie. Because again, these are not vulnerable Democrats. These are blue districts, and this is exactly, look, okay, so I'm gonna give you a statement from a Jeffries spokesperson, okay? So the Washington Post reaches out to her, and here's what she had to say. It should come as no surprise that the chair of the House Democratic Caucus plans to support the re-election of members of the House Democratic Caucus who are working hard to enact President Biden's Build Back Better agenda. Okay, let's stop right there. You guys understand what this is really about. The only hope we have in finding members of Congress to fight on our behalf and ensure that we have important provisions in things like the infrastructure bill, for instance, is to elect people like the Squad, right? Members of the Squad. What Jeffries and other corporate Democrats hate is that they have to debate, they have to negotiate, they have to deal with individuals in Congress who hold them accountable and force them to challenge what their corporate donors want. They don't want it. It's a thorn in their side. That's what this is really about. That's all this is about. They want to be able to provide all the wins for their corporate donors without having to deal with anyone within the Democratic caucus who challenges them, calls them out. And to be quite honest with you, I mean, we've had issues with members of the Squad, right? And progressives in Congress in terms of fighting back and publicly speaking out against members of the Democratic Party who are clearly standing in the way of getting progressive policies accomplished. But they're the only ones that are fighting for us at all. And Jeffries and other corporate Democrats, they don't want that. So Cenk is absolutely right in that Jeffries is not the activist. He's the one who wants to stomp out the activists.
Well, a sensible reason for the story is he started a PAC to crush the activist base. Exactly. But it was framed in the exact opposite way. Last thing, and by the way, if you saw the rest of that quote, of course, they call anyone who's a progressive extreme left. extreme left, okay? And they print that. And guys, you should know the context of, I know hundreds of reporters and editors, so I know how these stories are written. You go and get an opposing quote here and there, so you say, hey, I was fair, right? But basically what you do is you get the quotes that you want to tell the story that you want. Should journalism be done that way? Absolutely not. Do they do it all the time? Yes. Is this a perfect example of it? Yes. The reason they end on the third way quote is so that the reporter and the editor can go, now remember everybody, which side you're supposed to be on. You're not supposed to be on the far left, extreme left side. You're supposed to be on the moderate side, which is the corporate side. And finally, this is really important. Now, when you see something like this, you know that if AOC and the others object to the so-called bipartisan infrastructure bill and they vote no, this is a warning sign to them. The Washington Post and the rest of the mainstream media will come to bury you. They will call you extreme left for voting no on that corporate bill that would make sure that we hand over our bridges and our roads to corporations and privatize them. But if you dare vote no on that, you're hurting Biden's agenda, and you're far left, and you're an extremist. And poor Hakeem Jeffries, who wanted to help his corporate friends. I mean, I didn't tell you that. Why didn't you tell us about all of his corporate donors? Why haven't you ever told us about that? Because you're not journalists. You're propaganda for the establishment. And so, and every one of those, we put pressure on those progressives in Congress. But to be fair to them, every one of them knows that if they ever dare oppose the establishment, it won't be other Democrats as much as it'll be the corporate media that viciously attacks them and tells everyone that they are the aggressors and it is their fault. And they're not good Democrats. They're good moderate corporate Democrats, those beloved people. They just wanted to give everything to corporations and make sure you never got a higher minimum wage and make sure you never got health care. And you see how moderate they are? That's who the Washington Post is.
Listen, progressives like Bernie Sanders cut into Jeff Bezos's profits and executives at Amazon's profits by doing an incredibly successful pressure campaign that led to them paying their warehouse workers a $15 an hour minimum wage. The bitterness toward that knows no bounds, and you can see it reflected in some of the reporting.
Yeah, but Anna, to be fair and unfair, I mean, to be objective about it, the Washington Post was always like this before Bezos bought it too. And I don't know that Bezos sends any memos, but the thing is he doesn't have to send memos, right? He hires the top, they hire all the different layers. And it was like that before Bezos came in. And it's not just the Washington Post. The mainstream media loves the status quo. And they think the objective position is to defend what they call moderates. Some have called it a centrist bias. I think it's a corporate bias, an establishment bias. But whatever it is, they view it as their job to say the current status quo that the rest of us find deeply corrupt is wonderful and moderate and decent and should never be criticized. Think about the Kafkaesque absurdity of that. They're supposed to challenge the powerful. Instead, they've taken it as their mission in life to protect the powerful. This is the exact opposite of what good journalism is.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.